The year is 439 CE, and the Roman Empire is splintering. Carthage, once the jewel of North Africa and a proud Roman stronghold, now trembles beneath the sails of northern invaders. The Vandals have crossed the sea, and their banners flutter just beyond the harbor. What was once an unstoppable empire has become a fading shadow. The legions have retreated, the walls are cracked, and the people are left behind, alone, at the mercy of a rising tide. And you are no longer a warrior. Once you served Rome at sea, but your armor has long been buried. Now you are simply a grandfather, living quietly in a city that is about to fall. But when you hear the hooves and smell the smoke drifting on the wind, you know it's time to pick up the oar once more. If you're drawn to emotional, historical journeys like this, rich with memory and meaning, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing this story with others who lie awake at night like you. Now, lie back, close your eyes, and let us take you back to a time long forgotten.
There is a taste to peace not sweet, not bitter, but old. It rests on your tongue like the dust of old amphorae cracked beneath the heel. You know it well now. This taste. It drifts from your vineyard each dawn as you rise, knees groaning, back crooked, hands roughened not by salt, but by soil. The vines climb lazily around the stone path you laid 20 years ago, before you ever called yourself retired, before Rome forgot your name. You don't think of ships often anymore. You've traded sailcloth for shade and spears for shears. The wind doesn't howl here like it did at sea. It sighs through olive trees, warm and without threat. And in this quiet, this soft-lidded countryside near Neapolis, you've come to appreciate something the sea never offered stillness. It creeps in the corners of the house. It sleeps beside your wine jug. It curls into the lines of your face. But stillness never lasts. Not in your world. Today, you are pruning a particularly stubborn vine, one that insists on tangling with the fig tree beside it. You mutter curses more out of ritual than rage. The sun creeps higher. The grapes hang heavy. And then you smell it wood smoke. Not your fire, not the neighbors, either. No scent of bread or meat, just burning timber, dry and fast. You look up, and there, above the green roll of the hills, you see it a column of smoke rising black and tall, coiling against the blue. One isn't unusual. Farmers burn refuse all the time. But now there's a second, then a third. And suddenly it's not the scent that tells you something is wrong. It's the birds. They flee inland, hundreds of them. Gulls, crows, even the dumb white pigeons your grandson once chased across the basilica roof. They swarm over your vineyard in silence, as if terrified of drawing breath. You put down the pruning hook. You do not move toward the smoke. Not yet. Instead, you walk inside your cottage, which is cool and smells faintly of beeswax and wet stone. On the mantel lies a wine bottle you've kept sealed since your 60th name day. You do not open it. You sit beside it. The chair creaks beneath your weight, the same weight that once dragged chainmail through tidewater and waded through bodies in Alexandria's burning harbor. You tell yourself this is nothing, a fire, an accident, but the tremor in your fingers betrays the lie. In the distance, bells begin to toll. Not church bells, not celebratory bells. No. These ring with the stuttered rhythm of panic, the uneven clang of uncertain hands. You haven't heard such bells since the Emperor's envoy announced a failed campaign in Gaul. That was 30 years ago. It doesn't matter. The vines can wait. Outside, your mule huffs near the stable, already nervous. The air thickens sharp and acrid now. You taste pitch, not the kind smeared on vineyard barrels. Ship's pitch, tar, burned hulls. You saddle the mule. Down the slope lies the road to Neapolis, a ribbon of dry dust and Roman pride. Statues line the edge, broken at the arms, moss draped at the chin. You pass them, as you've always done, without acknowledgement. But today, they seem to watch you. One, a forgotten Neptune replica, leans sideways as if whispering through a broken jaw. You do not answer. It takes an hour to reach the village. By the time you arrive, the smoke is closer, the bells louder. The forum is not packed, but not empty either. People drift like ash, uncertain, slow-moving. You know the faces, the baker with only one ear, the widow who still wears her wedding band on a chain around her neck, the stonemason's boy who thinks he can outdrink you, he cannot. All of them turn toward the rider. He is young, thin, pale beneath his dust. His horse sweats blood. You see it dripping from a cracked hoof. The boy doesn't notice. He's too busy shouting. "Carthage," he says. "They're taking Carthage." At first, no one moves. Then someone gasps. You don't know who. It might be you. "The Vandals," the rider adds, voice cracking, "from the sea." You step closer. Who sent you, you ask. It comes out too sharply. But you don't care. His eyes flick to you, hesitant. "The governor's court," he replies. "Messengers are being sent inland. We," he swallows, "were raising ships." Someone laughs. It's a cruel sound. No ships have been launched from Neapolis in over a decade. The rider turns away, spurs his horse, and rides on. But his words have already done what war always does, stripped silence bare. You walk back slowly. The vineyard now a mirage in the smoke-fogged distance. At your door, you find a letter waiting, wax-sealed, bearing your daughter's mark. Strange it wasn't there before. You break it open. There are only a few lines, hurried and ink-smudged. They're coming for Carthage. For us. The city gates have closed. I don't know what to do. He asks about you. His grandfather. He still remembers the story of the bronze sword. Come if you can. Livia. Your hands clench. You once sailed past Carthage when the empire held her firm, marble white and dignified. You traded wine and sawdust for glass and dates. You once bled in her streets not for gold, not for glory, but because someone had to stand when others fled. That was a long time ago, but not long enough. In the cellar beneath your house is a trunk. You haven't opened it since Honorius was emperor. The iron hinges squeal. Dust billows out like breath from a corpse. Inside a helmet, battered and sun-dulled, a pair of sandals worn smooth, a square-cut tunic still red, though moth-eaten, and a gladius, short, balanced, Roman. You grip the hilt. It fits as though your hand had been carved around it. Memory floods your knuckles of slicing rope, of prying open enemy decks, of gutting fish that didn't die easy. At the bottom of the trunk lies something softer, a child's drawing, years old. A boy with stick limbs, holding a massive sword above his head. The name scrawled beside him, is your own. You sit on the cold cellar step. In the vineyards above, the grapes sway. The wind brings smoke. You're too old for this. Your joints ache just from kneeling. You no longer trust your right eye. You haven't climbed a mast in 30 years. But the letter sits in your lap. The sword sits in your hand. And Carthage, your old ghost, is burning. You rise. The mule will carry you as far as Ostia. After that, it's ships. If there are any left. As you leave the cellar, you glance once at the mantle. The wine remains unopened. The sun has begun its slow descent toward the western sea by the time your mule reaches the first cobbled incline overlooking the outskirts of Ostia. The coastal air here tastes different, less of grape and clay, more of brine and rusting iron. It clings to your nostrils and settles in your bones, awakening memories not asked for, but never truly buried. You tell yourself it's fatigue, the stiffness of age, but something deeper stirs in your chest as you gaze upon the once grand harbor city sprawled before you like a gutted lion, majestic, still in outline, but hollow where muscle used to be. Ostia was once the pride of the empire's maritime reach, the pulse of trade and power, the gatekeeper of Rome's lifeblood. You remember when the masts here rose like a forest, when even foreign sailors spoke Latin out of necessity, if not reverence. Now, you count barely a dozen ships, some merchant, others barely floating moored awkwardly at decaying piers. Many lean as though drunk, their sails limp and tattered, their names erased or repainted by careless hands. The scent of pitch and salt is thick here, but beneath it, you smell something sourer neglect, desperation, and worse, fear. You dismount slowly, wincing as your knees object. The mule, your only living companion these past quiet years, brays softly and leans against a dry trough. You pat its flank and whisper something that even you don't hear. Words of thanks, regret, farewell. You're not sure anymore. The main harbor road, once paved in proud Roman basalt, is now a mosaic of weeds and wagon ruts. A pair of fishmongers quarrel in low voices by a crumbling statue of Neptune, whose trident has long since snapped. A child runs barefoot through a puddle of wine, giggling, then suddenly stops upon seeing you. The sword at your side, even half hidden beneath your cloak, draws uneasy stares. To some, it marks you as a remnant of an older, more disciplined world. To others, it signals danger, violence returned. You move slowly through the city gates, which are neither watched nor locked. That in itself speaks volumes. In your youth, no one entered Ostia without scrutiny, especially not an armed stranger. Now, no one stops you. Perhaps it is because no one is left to do so, or perhaps because in these times of crumbling order, all are strangers in their own city. The forum is not empty, but it is subdued. A handful of men and women cluster near the steps of the governor's office, speaking in hushed tones, their expressions tight with concern. The air buzzes not with the vitality of commerce or festival, but with the quiet dread of those awaiting bad news they already suspect is true. You walk among them unnoticed, like a ghost returning to a house long since sold. At the southern dock, a makeshift recruitment table has been set up beneath a faded canopy. A bored-looking scribe scratches names onto a wax tablet with a stylus dulled by sweat. Behind him, a Roman flag droops on a pole too tall for the cloth it bears. No line forms here. There is no crowd clamoring to defend the empire. You approach. And the scribe glances up, squints, then smirks. "You're here to sign up?" he asks, his voice flat with disbelief. "I thought you were here to ask directions to the cemetery." You do not respond immediately. Instead, you remove the cloak from your shoulders and lay it on the table. Beneath, the gladius hangs visibly from your belt, and your tunic, though worn, still bears the faint insignia of your old legion, stitched with care by hands long dead. The scribe's smirk fades, replaced by something approaching respect. Or perhaps it is recognition. "You've served," he murmurs, more to himself than to you. You nod. 3 campaigns, 2 seas, 1 empire, before it began to rot. He licks his lips nervously, then dips his stylus in ink. Name. You hesitate. Not because you've forgotten it, but because it has not been spoken aloud in a long time, at least not in this context. You give it, and he writes it slowly, as if unsure of its spelling. "Do you have a role in mind?" he asks. "There are no legions here, just a few converted merchantmen and conscripts. It's chaos. To be frank, I can row," you say simply, "and I can fight." The scribe blinks. "Row at your age. I've buried enough oars to know how to dig them up." He studies your face, then finally scribbles something and gestures toward a nearby tent made from patched sailcloth. They'll issue you gear inside, though I doubt they have much left that fits. Ship leaves at dawn, with or without her full crew. You'll find her at Pier 7. Look for the hull with 3 iron rings burned into her prow. You nod once and begin to walk, but he calls out again, quieter this time. "Sir, they say Carthage is already under siege." You pause, looking back. "That's why I'm going." Inside the tent, you find not order, but barely contained entropy. Crates are strewn open, revealing helms that don't match, shields without straps, and weapons dulled by time rather than use. A young woman with braided hair and soot-covered hands hands you a coiled rope and a worn leather satchel, then eyes you curiously. "You're the 3rd graybeard today," she says, not unkindly. They say the young men are hiding or fleeing, but the old ones, they keep coming back. They remember when this mattered. You reply, securing the satchel across your chest, and they know what it means when the sea goes quiet before the storm. She smiles faintly, then holds out a water flask. "You'll want this." You take it, and for a moment, your fingers brush hers. Warmth, life. Not all is decaying here. That night, you sleep on the deck of the ship you've been assigned to. Her name, if she ever had one, has long since vanished beneath layers of grime and repainted commands. The iron rings on her prow glint dully beneath the moonlight, like old scars. She creaks and shifts with the tide, impatient already. Her crew is a mix of strangers, some fresh-faced, others weary-eyed but all equally silent. No toasts are made, no speeches given. Each man clutches his thoughts like a dagger under the blanket. You lie on your back, staring at the stars. You remember how, in your prime, you could read the constellations as easily as a scroll. Now, they blur slightly, and you curse your right eye again. Still, you find the familiar ones: Pegasus, the ram, the bear. And there, near the edge, Orion's shoulder. You trace it slowly with your gaze, as if following an old friend through a forest. The sea rocks the ship gently, and you feel something uncoil inside you. Not peace, not yet, but a strange anticipation. The kind that comes before battle, or birth, or revelation. Below deck, someone begins to hum a low, almost inaudible sound, a tune without words. You recognize it instantly. It's the rowing cadence your old commander used in the Adriatic campaigns. Strange, how songs outlive the men who sang them. You do not join in, you simply listen. And when the moon dips behind a cloud, you whisper aloud not to any god or saint, but to your grandson. Wait for me. Dawn arrives not with the softness of a morning hymn, but with a damp heaviness that wraps around your lungs and presses into your spine like the first weight of armor returned to your shoulders after decades of peace. The sea, still bruised purple from the retreating night, does not glitter or beckon. Instead, it lies motionless, like a patient predator waiting beneath the surface for the first misstep. A low mist clings to the wharf, giving each man the illusion of solitude, though the deck groans under the collective presence of men who haven't yet remembered how to speak in war's direction. You rise from the plank you slept upon, your limbs stiffer than you'd admit to any watching eyes, and stretch with a groan that sounds more animal than human. The ache is not new, nor is it unfamiliar. You once carried a bleeding friend across the harbor of Rhodes while arrows darkened the sky. And even then, you felt the same pain. It is the body's way of reminding you that it remembers everything, even the things you've tried to forget. The muscles are slow to respond. The joints protest like stubborn children, but they move nonetheless. This, you think, is the first test not of strength, but of will. You are not alone in your rising. Around you, figures stir in the mist, some upright, some still coiled in sleep's last deception. Most are younger than you by a generation, though few are true youths. These are not Rome's golden sons, trained from birth in the art of war, bred in noble homes and raised with tales of Scipio and Aurelian. These are bakers, fishermen, scribes, and thieves. You see it in the way they grip their borrowed spears uncertain, reluctant. You see it in how they glance toward the horizon rather than the enemy, as if hoping some miracle wind will turn them back home. The captain arrives without ceremony. He is not what you expected, though you've long since stopped trusting your expectations. He is thin, not lean, but underfed, his eyes shadowed, his hands soft. His armor is too clean. The gold trim on his bracers hasn't seen dust, and his boots shine with fresh oil. He walks like a man who has read about war but never slept beside it. Still, there's something in his eyes panic. Perhaps that betrays the weight of responsibility he neither asked for nor prepared to bear. Rowers to position, he calls, voice cracking slightly, then recovering with forced authority. We set sail within the hour. The men begin to move, slowly at first, then with more purpose as fear converts into obedience. The ship's oars, stowed like ribs along the hull, are pulled free and settled into place. You claim one without asking, near the center where the pull is hardest and the rhythm must be strongest. You ran this exact row once on a war galley 3 times the size of this cobbled vessel. Your palms remember it before your brain does. The splinters, the burn, the wet slap of salt and sweat. A young man takes the bench beside you. His face is sharp with youth, his beard only a rumor. He glances at your weathered frame, then down at your hands. which are already wrapped in cloth from your own satchel. He doesn't speak, but there's something in his gaze, half curiosity, half unease. You pull with your back, you say, not looking at him, just loud enough to be heard over the creaking of the hull. He blinks. What? Don't use your arms. Use your back and hips. If you pull with your arms, you'll burn out before sunset. Then we'll have to drag your corpse back to Rome. He opens his mouth to reply, then closes it again, smart enough to listen, not wise enough yet to speak. You nod approvingly. The signal horn sounds low and mournful, like an ox bellowing beneath a butcher's blade. The oars dip into the sea as one, though not perfectly. Some splash, some skip. But the ship lurches forward nonetheless, carving a slow, uncertain path out of Ostia's harbor. The city slips behind you, its crumbling towers swallowed by the mist, and you feel not for the first time a sensation like being unmoored from time itself, as if the world ahead is not a future but a repetition of something you've already endured. Hours pass. The wind is slight, not enough to fill the sails, so the oars bear the burden. Your muscles ache with familiarity. The rhythm of rowing grip, pull, release becomes a meditation. You remember old cadences, sung low to pace the crew. Without thinking, you hum one aloud. To your surprise, others join in. At first, it is only the young man beside you, mimicking your tune in uncertain tones. Then another joins, then another, until the sound ripples down the deck like fire through dry reed. The words are half forgotten, lost in dialect and time, but the melody holds. It carries you, not just through water, but backward into campaigns long buried beneath empire and ruin. You are no longer a vineyard hermit or a relic of forgotten wars. You are part of a crew again, part of something living. Around midday, a gull follows the ship for nearly half an hour, circling above the mast like a quiet spirit. Some men take it as a sign. You hear one whisper that it is the soul of his brother, lost at sea 2 winters past. Another claims it is Juno's messenger. You simply watch it, admiring the precision of its wings. Birds do not care for empires or borders. They follow the wind and the fish, and they always find land. Your hands blister before nightfall. Even with the cloth wrappings, the oar's calluses return. You do not mind. Pain is an old friend. What unsettles you is the silence that creeps in as the sun dips low. The songs have faded. The men now pull in quiet concentration, the camaraderie of morning replaced by fatigue. The sea, too, has stilled. The waves flatten. The sky loses color not into night's black, but into a strange steel gray that offers neither beauty nor comfort. Then you smell it. Not the salt or tar or sweat, something sharper, cleaner, yet wrong. Fire, not nearby, not strong, but distant, carried by the wind in the faintest thread. You lift your head, nostrils flaring, and see others doing the same. No one speaks. You don't have to. Every man aboard knows that smell. It is not hearth fire or cooking flame. It is the scent of buildings burning, of pitch and wood and canvas. It is the breath of war. The captain walks the deck now, more alert, jaw clenched. He doesn't address the crew. He doesn't need to. He sees it too, a faint glow, just barely visible on the horizon, like a smear of blood across the sky's edge. Carthage is still far, too far for that glow to be her, but something burns between here and there. keep pace. He calls at last, voice lower now, less certain. We'll pass it by nightfall. You don't believe that. Neither do the others. As dusk swallows the sky, a silence heavier than before wraps around the vessel. The sea flattens even further, as if afraid to make a sound. You do not sleep, though many try. You sit near the bow, gladius across your knees, and stare toward that distant ember on the water's edge. At some point, a deckhand sits beside you. He's older than most, perhaps 50, but still younger than you. He wears no armor, only a cloak dyed badly with ochre. His fingers tremble as he pulls a small wooden token from his belt pouch. It's carved crude, but familiar. A laurel, split in two. From my father, he says. Unprompted, sailed under Constantine. Said the sea could smell fear. You nod. He wasn't wrong. The man chuckles bitterly, then glances at your blade. Yours is real Roman, he says. Seen better days, but still good iron. It's older than this ship, you reply, sheathing it slowly, and I trust it more. The man hums softly, then rises without another word. He leaves the token beside you. You do not pick it up. You already carry enough ghosts. The night unfolds not as a passage into rest, but as a deepening of unease. A slow descent into a silence too perfect to be natural. You sit upright on the oar bench, well past moonrise. Though the stars are few and the sky remains shrouded in thin, moving veils of cloud. Around you, men attempt to sleep where they can, some curled beneath tarps, others using coils of rope as pillows, but even their breathing seems too cautious, too rehearsed, as if rest has become performance rather than relief. You do not try to sleep. Sleep is a fragile gate, and tonight it would swing wide into places you have no desire to visit. Instead, you keep watch, because old instincts don't retire, even when muscles do. The ship, which some now call Vigilantia, though you suspect the name is ironic, glides slowly over the ink-dark waters. The oars have been lifted for the night. The crew rests to conserve strength. Only the mainsail is raised, catching whatever fitful breezes stir in the void between moonlight and mist. Somewhere ahead, across the water's silent stretch, lies Sicily. You've seen her before, long ago, from another ship, under another commander's watch. She is an island of ghosts now, caught between fading Roman loyalty and Vandal fear. As you listen to the creak of timbers and the hiss of brine against the hull, your thoughts stray not to your vineyard, nor to the boy waiting behind Carthaginian walls, but to a name you haven't spoken aloud in years. Flavius Marcellus. Not a name the world remembers, not a senator or a martyr, but a man whose back once bled beside yours in the harbor of Tyre. You recall the last time you saw him, face blackened with smoke, voice hoarse from shouting orders no one obeyed anymore. He gave you a leather waterskin with shaking hands and told you, "The sea remembers us. The land forgets. Go." And so you did. You wonder if he'd approve of your return. Near dawn, the lookout at the foremast hisses sharply, a warning more felt than heard. You rise immediately, squinting into the dim light. There, on the starboard horizon, floats a shape, small, slow, a sail, barely distinguishable from the mist. The captain emerges from below deck, already lacing his belt, and joins you at the prow. Together, you watch the silhouette drift, directionless, like a leaf torn loose from a dying tree. "It's not moving with purpose," he murmurs. You nod, dead crew or no wind. We approach. We pass without drawing near. But he hesitates. Curiosity is a disease among men who've never seen true horror. He gives the order regardless. The ship lists gently to port, and the rudder is adjusted. The oars remain stowed. No one wants to risk the sound. As you draw closer to the vessel, its details sharpen. It's a fishing ship, or what's left of one. Its mast is splintered at the tip, and its sail hangs like a rotten flag. A crow perches on the boom, silent and watching. No human sound emanates from the boat. The captain sends 2 men in a rowboat to investigate. You volunteer to join, but he declines. He's beginning to see you as a relic, something to preserve until the real fight. You don't press the matter. You remain on deck, eyes fixed. The rowboat reaches the drifting hulk in minutes. The men climb aboard. From the deck, you can see them moving slowly, weapons drawn. One vanishes into the lower deck. The other remains above, leaning cautiously over a cargo hold. Then, the one on the deck freezes. He raises his hand, not a wave, but a slow, trembling gesture that speaks of confusion. The other reappears, pale, gripping the gunwale as if afraid of the wood itself. He whispers something to his partner, and both leap back into the rowboat without further hesitation. Their paddles beat the water too loudly, breaking the stillness. When they return, they refuse to speak at first. Their eyes are wide. The captain demands an answer. "No blood," one finally says. "No bodies." Then what asks the captain? Food still warm. A loaf, half eaten. Fish in the net, still twitching. The second man swallows, but no people. Not even clothes. It's like they vanished while chewing. A hush falls. One man mutters a prayer. Another crosses himself. You don't. You've seen stranger things than a ghost ship. You've seen men walk into fog and come back not knowing their names. The captain gives the order to resume course. No one argues. By midday, the mist lifts. The sun glints briefly on the water's surface, and for a moment, it seems the world remembers how to be beautiful. The coastline of Sicily reveals itself a jagged silhouette, crowned by olive trees and dotted with white villas clinging stubbornly to the hills. You remember docking here, once, in pursuit of pirates who called themselves the Sons of Mascala. They fought with curved blades and sailed in boats fast as gulls. You bled from the shoulder in that fight and laughed while doing it. Your commander then had a voice like thunder and an appetite for honeyed wine. He is almost certainly dead now, but the thought of him raises your spirits in a strange way. The captain wants to stop for supplies, and you know the risk in this docking at an unmanned port, exposing the vessel to theft or ambush. But the barrels of water are near empty, and the bread has already gone stale. The crew needs food. He selects a cove sheltered, shallow, bordered by cliffs on 3 sides, and orders anchor dropped. A small group, including yourself, is dispatched ashore to find fresh water and perhaps fruit or fish. You carry a short blade and a canvas sack, stepping off the rowboat with the hesitation of one who no longer trusts solid ground. The path inland is overgrown, the stones cracked by time and neglect. A small shrine to Mercury lies toppled near the tree line, the god's face worn smooth by years of wind. It feels like a bad omen, but no one speaks it aloud. You find the well easily enough. The water is clear, though tinged with a strange mineral taste. You drink anyway. Hunger will dull your judgment. Thirst will kill it outright. As you return to the beach, your eyes catch movement higher up a figure, standing motionless at the crest of the cliff, cloaked, tall, no weapon visible, but something about the posture, the frozen way he or it watches you, sends a cold tremor down your spine. You blink, and the figure is gone. When you report this to the captain, he listens, then says nothing. He is not unwise. He knows there are things men don't chase. That evening, the crew eats a supper of wild figs, dried fish, and water too warm to be refreshing. Still, it lifts spirits. One man even sings a verse from a soldier's ballad that once earned him a slap in the legions. You smile despite yourself. The boy beside you, the same one you corrected on his rowing technique, offers you a strip of smoked meat. You fought near Carthage before he asks between chews. You nod. When it still had temples with gold ceilings and statues that look down on us like gods. And now, you chew slowly before replying. Now they say the Vandals are sharpening their swords on its steps. The boy goes quiet. That's good. Sometimes silence is the beginning of understanding. As the sun dips below the horizon, you take the first watch. The sea is darker here, less welcoming. You grip the rail and listen to the ship breathe. She is tired, like you. But she floats. You whisper your grandson's name, not because you think he'll hear you, but because you want to remember how it sounds before the war forgets it. The sea greets you on the 5th day with a breathless stillness that sets every man's nerves on edge. Not a ripple dances across the surface. The sails hang like forgotten laundry. Even the gulls, so noisy and intrusive just days ago, have vanished from the sky, as though banished by some silent command. There is no sound but the creak of the wood beneath your feet, and the occasional groan of the oarsman shifting in place, waiting for an order none of you are certain will come. The ship drifts like a coffin in a tomb of salt water, locked in a moment of unnatural calm that no sailor trusts. You sit near the center mast, carving absent-mindedly into a sliver of driftwood with a dull knife. It's not art you create, just patterns, lines intersecting like waves or branches, a habit born of long waits at sea. Your hands remember the motion even when your mind drifts elsewhere. The boy Owless, you've finally learned, is beside you again, chewing a piece of stale bread that has the texture of a broken brick. He offers you half. You accept it without a word. There is little need for conversation now. The silence speaks louder than any exchange. Above you, the captain walks slowly along the deck, hands clasped tightly behind his back. His armor has dulled, the shine replaced by the smear of sweat and sea grit, and he no longer shouts his commands with the clarity of certainty. He consults a scroll occasionally, squinting at the faded ink and then glancing toward the empty horizon as if willing the letters to change. A Roman fleet used to sail with clocks, maps, signal horns, and stars, all the tokens of mastery. Now, there is only guesswork wrapped in ritual. You rise and approach him without waiting to be acknowledged. He does not turn, but you speak anyway. We've stopped moving, you say, though it's unnecessary. He nods. The wind has left us. And the oars? Burning through the men too fast. Their hands are cracking, and their backs are failing. We'll wait. The wind will return. You glance upward. The sky is a flat dome of pale blue, absent even the threat of clouds. It feels artificial, like a painted ceiling in a wealthy merchant's villa, still perfect and entirely lifeless. There's a reason the Phoenicians called this the dead mirror, you murmur. They'd leave offerings in the water when crossing it. The captain turns now, brow furrowed. Superstition. You shrug. So was Rome once. You leave him there, returning to your bench. The ship remains suspended in that eerie equilibrium for hours. Some of the younger men try to pass time by gambling with pebbles, scratching marks on the deck and betting with moldy figs. Others nap in awkward shapes, their legs tangled beneath ropes and barrels, trying to forget their hunger and fear through dreams. But no one can sleep for long, because by afternoon, something begins to change. It starts not with sight, but with smell. A scent creeps over the water, thick, metallic, and sweet in the way only death can be. At first, it is faint, like a dream lingering on the edge of waking, then stronger, until even those who pretend not to notice begin to frown and sniff the air. Someone mutters that perhaps the galley's fish has spoiled, but you know better. You've smelled it before on battlefields, in ravaged ports, in cities after siege. It is the scent of blood, not fresh, but cooked by time and sun. The lookout calls from the crow's nest not with alarm, but with confusion. Sails, he says, small ones. You rush to the side, squinting toward the southwest, and there, barely more than specks, you see them 3 vessels, low and narrow, drifting listlessly but undeniably approaching. No flags, no signals, just shapes in motion. The captain's face tightens. He orders oars lowered, sails adjusted to catch even the faintest breeze. The crew complies without hesitation, grateful perhaps for anything that breaks the dead calm, even if it means rowing straight into uncertainty. As you close the distance, the truth becomes grotesquely clear. The ship's small merchant boats by design are adrift, empty of sound, moving together like corpses carried by current. The first has a torn mainsail and a hull scorched black. The second leans awkwardly, one side lower, waterline swollen. The third is worse. Bodies line its deck. They are not arranged with reverence or purpose. They lie where they fell, limbs sprawled in unnatural angles, some curled in fetal positions as if death came too quickly to brace for. Their skin is gray with salt, their eyes open and dried. One man's mouth is still ajar, as though frozen in mid-curse. You count at least 24, all clearly dead for days. But there is no blood, no wounds visible, no signs of battle, no broken arrows, no shattered blades. Just stillness and silence. The captain does not speak. He gives a slight motion with his fingers, and the ship steers wide of the flotilla. None of the crew suggest boarding. None speak of taking supplies. Even the hungry keep their eyes on the horizon, refusing to look too long at the ships of the dead. The wind, when it returns, smells even stronger of iron and decay. By nightfall, the crew refuses food, not from discipline, but from something deeper, some unspoken knowledge that to eat under such an omen would be to invite what follows. You drink water that tastes of mildew and stare up at stars you cannot name. Aulis breaks the silence beside you. My father used to say the sea has moods, he says quietly. Sometimes it's lonely, sometimes it's cruel, but sometimes it just doesn't care if you die. You nod slowly. Your father was a wise man. He was a fisherman, the boy says. He drowned when I was 7. I still dream about the way he used to tie knots. You watch the boy's hands as he speaks. Sure enough, they're wrapped around a loop of cord, fingers twisting it absent-mindedly into braids and coils. He works not from thought, but from memory. The way you swing a blade or haul an oar. He taught you well, you say, then pause. That skill may yet save your life. The ship lurches slightly, as though agreeing. The wind shifts. A few sails catch and groan, and the ship begins to move again, not fast, not confidently, but with purpose, like a wounded animal dragging itself toward shelter. A cheer rises, small and strained, from the rear deck. Some of the men dare to believe the curse has lifted. You do not share their optimism, but you do not dampen it either. Let them believe. Hope is fuel when the belly is empty. As you resume your post at the oar, the ship now angled toward the African coast, the captain comes to stand beside you. He does not look at you directly, but speaks low. Those boats, he says. That kind of death. Have you ever seen it before? You hesitate. Yes, you say finally, in Dyrrachium, and once outside Leptis Magna. He waits, but you say nothing more. Because the truth is, you do not understand what you saw. In both those places, soldiers and sailors had died without visible wounds, with looks of terror on their faces and no signs of struggle. Rumors spread afterward of poison gas, of curses, of gods displeased with imperial overreach, but no one ever found a source. No plague was confirmed. The bodies were burned, and the silence endured. The captain doesn't press. He simply walks away, his boots echoing hollowly on the deck. That night, you dream for the first time in days. It is not a pleasant dream. You are underwater, surrounded by silence deeper than any you've known. Your limbs are bound, not by ropes, but by vines, seaweed, and long dead hands. Faces drift around you, some you remember from battles past, some you do not. All stare without blinking, as if waiting for something. You open your mouth to scream, but no sound escapes, only sea water. Then you see Aulus watching from above the surface. He does not move to help you. He only whispers, "The sea forgets those who forget themselves." You wake before dawn, gasping, and the horizon is no longer empty. Far ahead, faint, but unmistakable, you see the first spires of Carthage, glinting gold beneath a cruel morning sky. By the time the sun fully emerges from the eastern horizon, an orb of molten copper pressing upward against a sky streaked with reddish haze, the first outlines of Carthage no longer shimmer on the edge of perception. They now rise with unmistakable authority and sadness from the earth, a fractured crown resting upon the head of a city that has lived too long. The ancient walls, once the envy and terror of Mediterranean empires, now show their wounds openly. From this distance, they appear weathered but still standing, dotted with defensive towers, like teeth in a mouth braced against a scream. The sea before the harbor churns sluggishly, as if reluctant to carry any more pain toward its once mighty shore. You stand beside the mast, bracing one hand against the rough cordage of a rigging line, feeling the familiar burn of rope against palm, a memory as visceral as any scar. Your back aches with the long pull of days spent rowing under both sun and omen. Your legs stiff from stillness and strain, but you keep your posture straight, your expression impassive. Around you, The other men cluster in uncertain silence, staring forward with expressions that range from forced bravado to unconcealed dread. Even the youngest among them, those who had clung to the vague hope that Carthage might still be an imperial stronghold, protected by legions and unshaken by barbarian wind, now sense the truth lingering in the air like smoke from a distant funeral pyre. The city does not look alive. That is the first and most painful realization. For all its height and spread, for all the domes and arches that once bore witness to senatorial decrees and merchant haggling, the skyline lies too still. There are no banners fluttering from watchtowers, no merchant sails cluttering the harbor, no columns of smoke from kitchen hearths or signal pyres. The once cacophonous harbor, which you remember as a chaos of shouting dockhands and clanging bronze bells, now lies in silence, broken only by the occasional caw of gulls circling above the crumbling amphitheater at the city's northern edge. The captain calls a quiet meeting at mid-deck. He does not raise his voice, because he doesn't need to. Every eye is already turned to him, drawn not by charisma or rank, but by the simple necessity of leadership in a moment where none wish to make decisions. He unfurls a weathered scroll atop a crate, one of the few remaining maps of Carthage not yet reduced to ash or obsolescence. His finger traces the outline of the outer harbor, then moves inward to the citadel and the residential districts beyond. "We cannot approach directly," he says, tapping the mouth of the harbor. "It will be mined or blockaded, if not by the Vandals, then by desperate defenders hoping to keep anything out. Our ship is too slow, too exposed. We'll draw fire before we find anchorage." A murmur passes through the crew. One man suggests sailing north and finding a place to land beyond the city, perhaps near one of the old aqueducts. Another speaks of the salt flats east of the necropolis, where shallow boats might be dragged ashore under cover of the marsh reeds. The captain listens, but does not confirm. He looks at you. "Old man," he says, without malice, "you've fought here before. What do you suggest?" You lean over the map slowly, letting your fingers drift across the papyrus until they rest upon a narrow inlet, a forgotten bend in the coastline, nestled beneath a limestone bluff. "Here," you say. "It's called the Morning Curve, named after a Phoenician legend. I think there's a hidden jetty carved beneath the rock, used by smugglers. The Empire cleared it once, but it was never destroyed. We landed there in my third campaign to surprise the rebels camped outside the eastern gates. If the Vandals haven't found it, and they may not have, it's our best chance." The captain nods, marking the location with a scratch of charcoal. "We make for the curve, then prepare the rowboats. As the ship begins to angle toward the southeast, you make your way below deck not to rest, but to retrieve the sword you packed away last night, wrapped in oilcloth and tucked beneath your bench. The gladius is shorter than you remember, or perhaps your arms have grown heavier. You draw it slowly, inspecting the edge, then set to work sharpening it with the whetstone tucked into your satchel, letting the rhythm soothe your mind. You sharpen not with haste, but with reverence, as one might prepare a holy relic for procession. This sword has taken lives. It has defended your own. It is not a symbol of conquest, but of necessity, of moments when there were no choices left but to stand or perish." Aulus sits across from you, knees drawn to his chest, eyes fixed on the blade. He says nothing for several minutes, then finally speaks. "Do you think they're alive?" You pause in your sharpening. Your daughter? Your grandson? Do you think they're still behind those walls? You look at him. His expression is not hopeful, nor is it resigned. It is simply searching, not for answers, but for something steady. I don't know, you reply honestly, because lying would serve no one. But I know that I won't sleep again until I see for myself. He nods. That seems enough for him. By the time the ship nears the morning curve, the sky has begun to turn a sickly shade of ochre. The sun, now nearly lost behind the western haze, casts long, broken shadows across the waves, making the surface appear like shattered glass. The cove comes into view slowly first, the dark slash of the cliffside, then the jutting rocks, then, at last, the narrow channel that once ferried contraband amphorae beneath the reach of imperial tax collectors. It is still there, partially collapsed at the far edge, but passable. 3 rowboats are lowered. You climb into the second, alongside 6 other men, including Aulus and a young archer named Septimus, who hasn't spoken a word since the ghost ships. The boat rocks gently as you push off, the splash of oars loud against the quiet. As you glide into the narrow inlet, the smell of seaweed and old salt rises to meet you, accompanied by the faintest whisper of wind funneling down the stone corridor like a breath drawn through ancient lungs. The jetty is overgrown and slick with moss, but you find footing. You hoist yourself onto the stone and turn back to help the others, your knees protesting each motion. The captain climbs up last, his eyes scanning the darkness beneath the cliff. This leads into the undermarket, you say, gesturing toward the weather-worn stairs carved into the rock face. It connects to the old aqueduct tunnels. We can use those to enter the city. There is no argument. You lead. The passage winds upward in tight curves, the air thick with the smell of rot and damp stone. The sound of your footfalls is muffled by moss, but your heartbeat thuds like a drum within your chest. These tunnels once echoed with the rush of water, with the footsteps of runners delivering secret orders, with the laughter of lovers hiding from patrolling guards. Now, they are silent. Dust coats the edges like frost. Your breath comes slower, more deliberate. You emerge at last into the ruins of the lower city, just beyond the merchant quarter. The buildings here are mostly intact, but deserted. Shutters hang open, doors creak on their hinges, market stalls rot beneath sun-bleached awnings. A single sandal lies in the dust beside a cart filled with broken amphorae. Everything has the look of sudden abandonment of a city that had seconds to flee. Then a sound. Faint, rhythmic. A child crying. It's coming from the far end of the plaza. You freeze. The others instinctively reach for weapons, but you raise a hand, not to quiet them, but to keep them from rushing forward. You advance slowly, heart pounding. Around the corner, in the shadow of a collapsed awning, you find a girl no more than 6 huddled beside a corpse. A woman. Her mother, most likely. The girl's hands are streaked with ash. Her eyes are wide and tearless. She doesn't scream when you approach. She just watches. You kneel. It's all right, you say, unsure whether she understands Latin. We're not here to hurt you. She doesn't reply, but she lets you lift her gently. Her body is light, too light, like she's been starving for days. You pass her to Aulus, whose arms wrap around her with surprising gentleness. We have to move, the captain whispers. We've been spotted. You turn to look, and there, atop the balcony of a building once used for tax collection, stands a man with blonde hair and armor etched with foreign script. A Vandal. He does not shout. He raises a horn to his lips and blows. The sound echoes like a prophecy down the empty streets. There is a moment, just after the Vandal's horn cry dies upon the wind, in which the world seems to hold its breath in unnatural stillness. A pause pregnant with the weight of incoming violence. It's not the silence of safety, nor the stillness of peace, but something darker, something that stretches taut like the final strand of a frayed rope about to snap. Even the dust in the street seems suspended, refusing to settle, caught mid-drift in shafts of late afternoon light slanting through shattered windows and the broken ribs of what used to be merchant stalls. The child, now held tightly in Aulus's arms, begins to tremble, not with sobs or cries, but with the kind of deep, paralyzing shivers that come only when the body remembers fear before the mind can name it. You've heard horns like this before, though none sounded quite so full of certainty. There's no panic in the note, no urgency or alarm. It's a cold declaration, as if to say, we see you, we know where you are, and we are coming. You straighten slowly from where you'd crouched beside the child's dead mother, your knees crackling with age and weight, and you look toward the captain, whose face has grown pale beneath a veneer of salt-stained sweat. His hand tightens around the hilt of his sword, though he does not draw it yet. We don't have time to argue. You say, your voice low but firm, cutting through the uncertainty that now coils like smoke around the men. We need to move. Fast. We can't fight here, not in these narrow lanes. Not with the girl. The captain nods, but his jaw clenches. Where do we go? You point down the alley that curves behind a half-collapsed apothecary, its walls etched with char marks and graffiti in both Latin and a crude Germanic dialect. There's a cistern chamber beyond the grain market, you say. It connects to the service tunnels under the citadel. We can lose them there if we don't wait. Aulus doesn't speak, but he adjusts the child in his arms, wrapping his tattered cloak around her more tightly, and takes his place beside you. The others fall into a tense formation, their movements stiff, clumsy. These are not hardened legionnaires, and fear is already beginning to unravel whatever cohesion held this makeshift crew together. You start forward, pressing into the shadows of the alley, your ears tuned to every scrape of leather, every creak of beam or shifting stone. The city is not dead, but it has become something else, some half-living thing, breathing shallowly through the mouths of rats and wind, haunted by its own abandonment. You emerge into what remains of the grain market, once a hub of activity where the empire's finest wheats and barleys were bartered and weighed with care. Now the stalls lie shattered, their scales rusted and their sacks torn open, kernels scattered like bones across the flagstones. A statue of Ceres stands broken at the center of the square, her head severed cleanly from the neck and replaced by a Vandal helmet perched mockingly on the jagged stump. You do not look away, nor do you linger. There is no time for outrage, only escape. Behind you, the sound of pursuit grows, not the thunderous clamor of a charging army, but the more sinister rhythm of trained killers moving with discipline. You hear boots striking stone in synchronized cadence, hear low barks in a language unfamiliar to most but recognizable enough by tone commands, terse and efficient. The Vandals are not simply chasing you, They are hunting, and they do not seem to be in a hurry. That realization tightens the knot already lodged in your chest. The entrance to the cistern chamber is hidden beneath what was once a grain cellar, its trapdoor cleverly disguised beneath a collapsed section of wall. You find it without hesitation, your fingers brushing across the carved symbols of Neptune and Mars, symbols you remember marking decades ago when your unit used these passages to conduct ambushes against Berber raiders. You press down, hard. The door groans, sticks for a breathless moment, then yields. A cool gust rises from the darkness below, smelling of algae, dust, and memory. One at a time, you whisper, helping Aulus lower the child into the gloom. She does not resist. Perhaps her terror has become numbness. The others follow, descending with grunts and curses muffled by urgency. You are the last, and as you descend the slick stone steps, you pull the door closed above you with a quiet finality that feels less like concealment and more like burial. The darkness is complete for a moment. Then someone lights a lantern, a small, oil-fed flame that casts flickering shadows along the curved walls of the chamber. You can see the others now, crouched and breathless, their faces ghostly in the wavering light. The ceiling above glistens with condensation, and the floor is slick with shallow water. But the passage stretches forward, narrow but clear. You begin to move. The air grows colder as you go deeper, and the silence becomes oppressive, not because of its weight, but because of what it fails to hide: the occasional sound of dripping water, the sudden scamper of rats along the edge of the stones, the echo of your own breath sounding too loud in your ears. Each footfall splashes faintly, each motion magnified by the narrowness of the corridor. There are carvings along the wall here, too faded now, but still visible under the lantern light. Symbols of forgotten cults, early Christianity, even one Phoenician emblem you recognize from your earliest campaigns, scratched into the limestone as if someone needed to be remembered even here, in the bowels of a dying empire. Aulus speaks softly from behind you. What will we find at the end of this? You consider the question, but not for long. If the city still has a soul, you say, it will be waiting for us at the center. If not, then we've reached the heart of a corpse. He does not reply, but you feel him press on, his pace unwavering. Eventually, the passage opens into a wider chamber, one that once served as a reservoir for the upper quarters. Here, the ceiling rises into a dome of blackened brickwork, and the walls widen enough that you can finally breathe without tasting your own exhale. The lantern's light expands, and in its glow, you see signs that others have passed through here recently: boot prints in the grime, scraps of cloth, a burnt torch stub. There's no blood, no bodies, but that absence itself is ominous. Whoever passed through did not linger, nor did they come for shelter. You pause only long enough to let the group catch their breath, then press onward again, leading them down another corridor that slopes upward, curving slightly left. If your memory holds and you pray to whatever forgotten gods still haunt this place that it does, this path will emerge near the base of the old Senate Hall, just inside the inner walls of the city's fortified district. You are perhaps 20 steps from the next turn when you hear the first sound that freezes your blood. It's not a shout, not a war cry. It's laughter, light, distant, echoing in a way that makes it impossible to place. It could be behind you, ahead, above. You stop mid-stride, raising a hand, and the others halt instantly. You glance back toward Aulus. He tightens his grip on the girl, whose face is buried now in his tunic. The others draw weapons, swords, spears, daggers, though their hands tremble. The laughter ceases as abruptly as it began. You move faster now, no longer bothering with silence. The corridors narrow again, then open into a stairwell, half collapsed and treacherous. You climb, ignoring the protests of your knees, ignoring the way the stone crumbles beneath your feet. At the top, you find the exit a rusted iron grate, its hinges corroded but not beyond strength. With a grunt, you shove it open. Sunlight stabs into your eyes like a blade. The city greets you not with welcome, but with carnage. The Senate Hall lies in ruin. Its marble pillars have toppled, its bronze doors pried open and warped by fire. Corpses litter the steps, some armored, some in togas, some reduced to bone and cloth. The banners of Rome lie in shreds across the plaza. A unit of Vandals drags prisoners toward the gardens of the old palace, laughing, jeering, pushing with spear butts. You do not draw your sword. You duck low and motion the others to follow you through the broken colonnade into the shell of what used to be Carthage's heart. The air reeks of ash and blood. You step over the remnants of the old rostrum, now blackened with soot, and guide the group through a side hall once used by scribes and servants. There is no safety here, only the thinnest hope that somewhere beyond this ruin, your daughter and grandson are still alive, hiding, resisting, surviving. You make a silent promise as you lead the others forward. If they are gone, you will not leave this city until the man who gave that horn cry lies silent beneath your blade. And if they yet live, you will not let history forget that you came for them. There is a peculiar truth one uncovers in cities under siege, especially those that once considered themselves untouchable. The walls, once proud and defiant, seem to crumble not only from external force, but from the internal rot of forgotten promises. You realize this almost immediately as you move through the scorched remains of Carthage's central quarter, weaving between cracked marble columns and blackened archways, ducking beneath broken beams and the tangled limbs of the fallen. Once a place of civic ritual and commercial glory, the inner city has become an ossuary, no longer a dwelling of citizens, but a scattered museum of the dead. Each corridor lined with ash where scrolls and ledgers once rested, each chamber now echoing with the ghosts of senators who spoke too slowly and soldiers who never arrived. You advance cautiously, sword drawn, its once polished surface dulled by the dust of long disused justice. The others trail behind you, Aulus still clutching the child. The captain silent now with the weight of decisions pressing upon him like a millstone around the neck. No one speaks. Words would only disturb the fragile equilibrium that has settled between you. All the shared understanding that from this point forward, every corner may hide a blade, every shadow might be the last, and every breath might taste of steel. Through the remnants of the archiving hall, you step over shattered statues, many of which bear the faces of forgotten administrators, men who once ruled from benches of power, their likenesses now reduced to rubble. One, a bust of Claudius Severus, a provincial governor once known for his rigid enforcement of trade levies, lies split cleanly in two, his severed granite head rolling into a pool of stagnant rainwater like a warning. The Vandals have not simply occupied the city. They've desecrated it with purpose, as if their conquest required not only dominion, but erasure. The child begins to cry again, Not a loud, wailing sob, but a hiccuping whisper of grief that escapes even as she buries her face into Aulus's chest. He tightens his arms around her, murmuring words that even he knows cannot be understood. Comfort, in this place, is a form of rebellion, and for a moment, you are grateful for it. You stop at a fork in the corridor, staring down two diverging paths, one leading deeper into the administrative ruins, the other angling toward what remains of the residential blocks beyond the temple quarter. You remember this area well. During the old campaigns, your unit had camped not far from here, inside an abandoned bathhouse that still retained heat in its stones. You recall the smell of sweat and bronze oil, the steam rising from cracked tiles. The laughter of men who didn't yet know their names would one day be scratched onto the underside of a forgotten gate in Gaul. Now, there is no laughter. Only a low, continuous hum in the air, like a hive disturbed, or a city holding its breath before collapse. The captain steps beside you, his face haggard but alert. "We need shelter. The girl's barely conscious," he says, his voice rough, as though each word requires effort. You nod, eyes scanning the terrain. "There's a place," you murmur, gesturing toward the eastern path. An old basilica that was repurposed as a hospice after the last Berber incursion. They used it to treat the wounded clean water. Strong walls. If anything still stands in this quarter, it will be that. He hesitates for a breath, then signals the others to follow. You move quickly now, stepping around fallen masonry and ducking beneath collapsed balconies. The residential quarter has fared worse than the rest of the city. Its walls bear the scars of more recent violence, burn marks shaped like hands, blood streaks not yet blackened by time, and doors hastily nailed shut from the inside. Here, resistance lived, and here, it died. You pass what was once a weaver's shop, its windows broken, its bolts of cloth unraveled across the street like the entrails of civilization. A dog lies curled in a doorway, unmoving, its ribcage silent beneath a coat of dust and flies. When you reach the basilica, you are astonished to find the front facade still mostly intact. Its entrance arches have been blackened with smoke, and the steps are cracked, but the building itself stands with the stubborn resilience of old stone. Two carved angels flank the doors, though one has lost its head, and the other weeps eternally into a chipped urn. You shoulder open the doors, their hinges groaning with protest, and step inside. It is cool within, and the scent, though touched by decay, is not unbearable. Dust motes dance in the fractured light filtering through stained glass windows, some of which remain unbroken. The fresco above the altar, once a proud depiction of Constantine's baptism, has faded to a pale smear of blue and gold. Pews lie scattered across the floor, many overturned, as though in flight or riot. But the space offers shelter, and in this moment, that is all that matters. You motion for the men to bring the girl to a recessed chamber behind the altar, a place once used for quiet prayer and now offered as a refuge. Aulus lays her gently upon a bench, wrapping his cloak beneath her head. Her eyes flutter, then close, though you can see by the tightness of her lips that she does not sleep. Her fear runs deeper than exhaustion. The others begin to settle in the archer Septimus, wiping grime from his arrows. The baker's son nervously adjusting the straps of his borrowed cuirass. The captain pacing near the entrance like a tethered wolf. You remain standing, watching the high window where light filters through in strange, uneven patterns. Something about the silence feels deceptive. It's Aulus who breaks the quiet. "She's burning up," he says, placing a hand on the child's forehead. "We need water and cloth, something clean." You nod, pointing toward the side corridor where hospice supplies were once stored. "Come, there's a storeroom. If anything remains, it'll be there." Together, you make your way into the hallway, your footsteps echoing off tiled floors, once scrubbed by novices, now likely dead or fled. The storeroom is dim and cluttered, its shelves half collapsed. But amidst the detritus, you find a jar of dried herbs, a dusty roll of linen bandages, and a dented basin. Miraculously, a small clay amphora tucked beneath the table still sloshes with water. You sniff it, stale, but clean enough. As you gather the supplies, Aulus speaks again. "She's not the only one, you know." You turn. "What do you mean?" "There are more children in this city, hiding, maybe with parents, maybe alone. We can't just find your family and leave." You stare at him for a long moment. His eyes are unwavering. You see no naivete there, no illusion of grandeur or martyrdom, just quiet, resolute truth. "I didn't come to rescue the city," you say, voice low, "but if we're to leave it, I'll not do it while stepping over orphans." That, it seems, is enough of a pact. You return to the main hall, where the captain has taken up position near the broken door, one ear tilted toward the street. He holds up a hand as you approach. "Scouts," he whispers. "2 of them. Vandal cloaks. Moving through the quarter, checking buildings. Looking for us. Maybe. Or anyone." You crouch beside him, peering through the crack. 2 men move between the shadows, one holding a short spear, the other a curved sword with a blackened hilt. They speak softly, occasionally knocking on doors, occasionally dragging someone into the open and leaving it there. Their pace is not frantic. These are men confident in their control, unafraid of retaliation. "We take them," you say. The captain eyes you. "There are more, likely." "There are always more." You step outside before anyone can stop you. It is foolish, perhaps, but calculated. You know these streets, and you know how men behave when they believe themselves invincible. You step between the columns, keeping your sword low, your pace steady. You time your breath. 1, 2, 3. You strike the first one before he sees you, your gladius driving upward beneath his ribs, your other hand clamping over his mouth. He dies soundlessly, his eyes wide with indignation more than pain. The second turns, raising his blade too late. Aulus has followed you, faster than expected, and his knife buries itself in the man's throat with brutal efficiency. You stare at the younger man. "You were supposed to stay inside." He shrugs. "You look like you could use help." You do not argue. Together, you drag the bodies into a ruined stable, covering them with debris. You take the sword from the second Vandal, a better blade than your own. Lighter, curved. You toss your old gladius aside. It's a strange feeling, abandoning the weapon that has served you through so much. But change has come to the city, and to you. As you return to the basilica, the wind picks up. Not strong, but steady, from the west. And on it rides the distant sound of drums. The wind that comes from the west carries more than just the faint, rhythmic beating of distant war drums. It brings with it the dry, acrid scent of burning wood mingled with the sharper, sourer undertone of scorched meat. It is the unmistakable odor of a city being gutted by slow fire. And as you stand just within the cracked threshold of the basilica, your new blade still smeared with the blood of the Vandal scout, you realize with heavy certainty that the final act has begun. Carthage, ancient and proud, once queen of North Africa, is not simply under siege, it is unraveling from within. You feel the shift in the stone beneath your feet. It's subtle, but undeniable, a kind of vibration that seems to pulse upward from the earth itself, as though the very foundations of the city are beginning to groan beneath the weight of too many centuries, too many conquerors, too many broken oaths. You step back into the nave, your boots clicking softly against the cracked marble floor, and you find that the others have begun to sense it too. The captain no longer paces. He now stands utterly still, eyes fixed on the slatted light leaking through the high windows, his hands gripping the rusted balustrade of the choir rail so tightly that the veins on his arms stand out like ropes. Septimus, the archer, who has said almost nothing since disembarking from the ship, is now crouched beneath one of the side arches, murmuring what sounds like a prayer or perhaps a childhood rhyme, his eyes darting toward the shadows as if expecting them to reach for him. Even Aulus, who has proven himself to be steadier than his years should allow, is now holding the girl tighter, his fingers flexing rhythmically as though unsure whether to soothe her or prepare to hand her off before lifting a weapon again. She, for her part, lies silent still. Her fever has not broken, and though she stirs occasionally, moaning faintly or twitching her small limbs in fevered dreams, she remains trapped in that strange half-world between waking and unconsciousness, a state that both protects her and renders her helpless. You crouch beside her now, laying a hand gently on her forehead, and it is like touching a sun-heated stone. Her skin is taut, glistening with a fine sheen of sweat, and when she mutters in her sleep, the words are not Latin, but some local dialect, perhaps Berber or Phoenician, the ancestral tongues of the city's earliest breath. She won't last much longer, Aulus says from behind you. His voice is flat, not cruel, simply resigned. You nod, unwilling to say the words yourself, and rise slowly to your full height. We need to find them, you say, now. The captain turns toward you, his face impassive, but tired in a way that makes him look far older than his actual years. You're sure they're still alive? No, you answer, and you do not try to lie. But I have to be. He doesn't argue. He gestures to the others, who begin gathering their things with quiet efficiency. Weapons are strapped back into belts. Boots are tightened. Water flasks are tested for weight and capped again. The girl is wrapped in a rough wool cloak and passed carefully to Aulus, who bears her without hesitation. It is not a group of soldiers who leaves the basilica, but a ragged procession of survivors' men with too many regrets and too few illusions. You lead them east, through what was once the wealthier quarter of the city avenues lined with statuary, fountains now dry and choked with debris, the homes once whitewashed and adorned with mosaics now burnt and blackened, their balconies sagging like broken ribs. You remember this district well. You patrolled it during the year of the bread riots, when citizens rebelled over a tax increase levied to fund yet another imperial monument in Ravenna. You remember how you and your unit stood guard beside a marble lion while aristocrats hurled invectives at one another from the safety of their balconies. You remember dragging men out of wine cellars not because they were looting, but because they had simply given up, choosing sleep beneath the casks rather than another day in a city that had forgotten them. Now, the lion statue is gone, toppled and defaced. In its place lies a pile of refuse, bones, and broken pottery. The only figures in the windows now are shadows. You find the street where your daughter once lived, or rather, where you think she did. The house numbers are gone, the facades scorched, and the balconies collapsed. You approach what used to be her doorway, heart thudding like a war drum, and push it open slowly. Inside, you find nothing familiar. The walls are blackened. The floor is covered in ash. The wooden beams of the ceiling have fallen inward, forming a skeletal cage over what was once the atrium. A jug lies smashed in a corner. A child's sandal, far too small, sits upright in the ash near the hearth. You step forward and crouch down, lifting the sandal gently. It is not your grandson's. You can tell by the size. You feel Aulus step in behind you. He does not speak, but his presence is steady, grounding. You glance at him, then gesture for the others to wait in the street. "We'll check the other rooms," you say, though you're not sure there are any left to check. The back chambers are worse. The roof has caved in completely in one, and another smells of mold and something darker, something that suggests blood, long dried. But the last room, the one at the rear, which once served as a study or a nursery, you're not certain which still has part of its roof intact, and in it, you find something that makes your breath stop short. A carving. It's scratched into the plaster wall. Just above what used to be a writing desk, a small bird crudely drawn, perhaps with a nail or a knife, its wings outstretched. Beneath it, in a child's hand, the letter P. Your grandson's name is Publius. You reach out and touch the wall, your fingers trembling. The plaster crumbles slightly beneath your calloused fingertips, but the carving remains. "He was here," you whisper. Aulus kneels beside you, holding the girl with one arm. That means he might still be nearby. You nod, or someone took him. "Why draw the bird?" You smile faintly. He liked birds. Sparrows, mostly. Said they reminded him of sails, small wings on the wind. A sound breaks your reverie. A distant shout. Then another. The captain appears in the doorway, breathing hard. Scouts again, and not alone. They've spotted us. You move instantly. There's no time for grief, for memory, for the ghost of a child's drawing to tether you to the floor. We go north, toward the port. If they moved him, that's where they'd take him. The group regathers in the street. The noise is growing now, more boots, more shouting, the clang of armor against stone. The Vandals are moving not in pairs anymore, but in squads. Their net is tightening, and you are inside it. You sprint down the street, leading the group through alleys and over ruined aqueduct arches, your knees screaming, your breath tearing through your chest like canvas in a gale. Behind you, the child in Aulus's arms begins to stir, her fevered eyes opening again. Just for a moment, she whispers something. A name. You don't hear it. At the edge of the residential district, you find a barricade makeshift, but solid. Crates, broken carts, furniture, and behind it, people. Romans, or what's left of them. A dozen, maybe. Faces hollowed by hunger, eyes bright with desperation. One of them raises a spear. State your name. You step forward. I am Titus Aelius, retired tribune of the 3rd Italic Legion. We're not Vandals. The spear lowers slowly. Titus, the man says. I knew a Titus once. Had a scar on his left wrist. You pull back your sleeve. The scar is still there. The man lowers his weapon. Let them through. They open the barricade, and you step inside the last Roman-held quarter of Carthage. There is a strange and solemn irony in the way humanity clings to the last shreds of order amid collapse. How, even as empires burn and the very mortar of civilization turns to ash beneath their feet, people will still erect makeshift barriers, name unofficial leaders, ration water in cracked amphorae, and assign sentry rotations using rusted swords and voices hoarse from hunger. It is this peculiar tenacity that greets you now, as you step beyond the barricade into the remnants of what might once have been a garden district, but now serves as the final redoubt for a ragtag band of survivors too weary to fight, yet too stubborn to surrender. Their eyes sunken, yet watchful, their bodies gaunt, yet poised, each motion echoing with the exhaustion of prolonged dread, held at bay only by the grim routine of enduring one more day. You can feel it as soon as you cross into their territory, that heavy, damp tension that clings to every corner, not born of hope, but of the hollow stillness that settles in people who have seen too many friends buried without rites and heard too many children die before names were ever carved into stone. A boy, perhaps 12 or 13, but shrunken to the size of a much younger child, stands to the left of the gate, holding a broken pilum with more pride than menace, his eyes flicking over you. Owless, the fevered girl still wrapped in cloth, and the others, scanning not for weapons, but for signs of sickness or treachery. Behind him, a woman with a linen wrap binding a fresh wound across her ribs leans against a collapsed column, nursing a child of her own whose breath rattles with a sound you've only ever heard in soldiers with pierced lungs. Death singing softly through the narrow flutes of their throats. The captain steps to your side, his eyes narrowing as he surveys the haphazard camp, if it can even be called that, a few fire pits dug into the earth of what used to be an ornamental courtyard. The overgrown remains of rose hedges now tangled with drying laundry, and a shallow trench where rainwater has been trapped and covered with leaves to slow evaporation. He says nothing for a while, perhaps because there is nothing meaningful to be said, or perhaps because the weight of what he sees presses against his chest too heavily to allow speech. Eventually, he mutters something to himself in low Latin, an old proverb about wolves hiding in sheepfolds, and steps back, letting you take the lead again. An older man approaches from the center of the camp, limping heavily on a stick fashioned from a broken balustrade, his left foot twisted by age or injury, his face leathered with the twin abrasions of sun and loss. He bears no insignia of rank, no armor or cloak to signal leadership, but the way the others make space around him, the subtle deference of their posture, the way even the armed women bow their heads as he passes, tells you he is the voice they have chosen, or at least the one they trust most to speak aloud what they all feel. He halts a few paces from you, squinting into your face, and when he finally speaks, his voice is not loud or commanding, but calm and measured, like a man who long ago discarded the luxury of emotion and now speaks only to survive. You say your name is Titus Aelius, he says, his words deliberate, as though each syllable must be weighed before it is spent. Tribune of the 3rd Italic. If that's true, then you fought during the revolt of the 2 rivers. You would have been stationed at the southern gate when the Moors breached the aqueduct. You nod, surprised but not displeased at the specificity of his memory. We held for 3 days until the walls collapsed. My unit made a final stand in the basilica. He taps his stick once against the ground. Then you would have known Vero Lucullus. I carried his body out myself. You reply, he was my legate. The man exhales slowly, heavily. A brief flicker of something softens the lines around his eyes, and he nods once more, as if confirming not only your identity, but the authenticity of something deeper, a shared burden neither of you asked to carry. My name is Caldus, he says. I was a grain accountant. Once. Now I guess I'm whatever passes for command here. He gestures toward the courtyard with the end of his stick. This is all that's left. 37 of us. Maybe 36 too are sick, and one hasn't spoken since yesterday. We've got dried beans, a few jars of olive paste, and about 4 days of water if the sun doesn't rise too hot. You glance toward the others, your men, tired but ready, Aulus, still cradling the girl with one arm and gripping his spear with the other. The captain, his mouth drawn into a permanent scowl of concern. Then you turn back to Caldus. I didn't come here for food or water, you say, though I won't refuse it. I came to find my daughter, Livia, and her son, Publius. They lived 2 blocks west of the Senate Hall, near the old Silver Mint. Their house was marked with a carving of Janus over the door. Caldus's expression hardens not in suspicion, but in the way a man's face tightens when he braces to deliver news he would rather avoid. There were families in that district, he says slowly. But the Vandals swept through 10 days ago. Most who didn't flee burned with their homes. A few were taken. Children mostly. Some women. Slaves. If they thought them useful. Taken where? He shrugs, though the motion is more defeat than dismissal. Some to the port, others to the theater, where they're staging their commanders. Maybe even the old cistern compound. They've made it a depot. We've tried to send scouts, but he trails off, gesturing toward the ragged state of his people. And you understand. You bow your head for a long moment, not in submission, but in thought, letting the grief swell and settle like a tide. Before speaking again, I found something. In her home, a carving my grandson made his bird. He was there. He might still be alive. Caldus sighs, then lifts his eyes to meet yours. Then I'll show you what we know, and I'll send who I can to help. We all have someone we're still looking for. You spend the next hour in the corner of a ruined atrium with a dusty mosaic depicting Ceres and her grain-bearing handmaidens, listening as Caldus traces crude maps into the dirt using his stick, marking out known Vandal patrol routes, suspected prisoner holds, and the few alleys and tunnels still uncollapsed. You commit every inch to memory, your fingers twitching at your sides as though already gripping a blade. You divide your men, assigning 3 to remain with the camp to protect the girl, the water, and the wounded. The rest you take 7 in total, including Aulus, who refuses to be left behind, and Septimus, who, though he has spoken little, watches with an intensity that speaks of debts yet unpaid. You wait until nightfall, when the sky dims to bruised violet and the stars emerge one by one like eyes daring to watch what unfolds. Then, cloaked in rags and silence, you slip out through the northeast breach in the barricade, down a forgotten aqueduct trench, and into the broken belly of a city whose heart you still hope beats somewhere in the shadows. You pass bodies in alleys some weeks old, bloated and curled in postures of desperation. Others recent, their blood still sticky, their faces twisted in final, terrible questions. You do not look away. There is no room now for revulsion, only remembrance. At the theater, you see firelight, torches, patrols in armor bearing animal skin crests and curved blades. You do not approach. You listen. You observe. You wait. And then movement. A wagon, guarded by 4 men, pulled by a single ox, laden with sacks and boxes, and huddled forms. Children, their hands bound, some sleeping, some awake. You see a boy with curly hair and a birthmark on his left cheek. You do not speak. You move, and the trap you lay will be swift. The moments before violence, before the decisive surge of action, have a flavor all their own, something that coats the mouth and settles in the stomach like cold oil, numbing the senses in one breath and sharpening them in the next. For it is in this suspended hush, this prelude of tension and potentiality, that the world seems to hold its breath, and every detail, each flicker of firelight, each metallic clink of a belt buckle, each whisper of leather over stone becomes enormous, vivid, and deeply, achingly human. You crouch behind a splintered wall of a crumbled bakery whose roof has long since collapsed inward, the stale scent of flour and old ash still lingering in the debris around your boots, while just a stone's throw ahead of you, 4 Vandal guards surround a lumbering ox-drawn cart, their postures casual in that overconfident manner of men who believe the city already belongs to them entirely, and who have grown used to seeing Roman resistance amount to little more than the angry last breath of broken civilians and ragged priests waving torches as though the gods still answered. The cart itself is a creaking monstrosity, rough-hewn, low to the ground, with a sagging canvas drawn over part of the rear, and 2 massive wheels caked with dried mud and streaks of blood from earlier hauls. And within it, your eyes fixate on the most fragile cargo of all, a cluster of children, perhaps 8 in total, all bound by wrists or ankles, huddled close for warmth, protection, or the vague, instinctual recognition that proximity can sometimes delay death, even when it cannot prevent it. They do not speak, these children, for silence is a lesson quickly learned in the hands of soldiers who strike before they shout. But their eyes glint in the torchlight with that eerie, knowing awareness that belongs not to innocence, but to its premature death, and one among them slighter than the others, with dark curls matted against his brow and a small, crescent-shaped scar beneath one eye, makes your breath catch. For even in the flickering shadow, you know that face. Publius. He is thinner than you remember, his cheeks hollow, his shoulders trembling beneath a ragged tunic, but he is alive. And though your heartbeat pounds with such ferocity that it nearly deafens you to everything else, you force your body to stillness, to control. Because a single mistake here will not only destroy your mission, it will seal the fate of the boy whose face has haunted every sleepless hour since the smoke first rose above the coast of Carthage. Beside you, Aulus crouches low, his breathing steady but intense, his eyes darting between the guards and the path ahead like a hound scenting the shape of an invisible predator. His hand rests on the hilt of the dagger tucked beneath his belt, its blade sharpened on the hull of the ship, its edge eager but not yet blooded in true combat, and he turns his head only slightly to whisper, barely audible, "We have one chance." We take the lead man first. He's closest to the wagon. Then the others, fast and quiet. You take left. I take right. You nod. Not because the plan is flawless, it isn't, but because there is no time to devise anything better. And action must always follow conviction, not perfection. The others, Septimus, the captain, 2 more from the crew are in position, spread across the remains of the alley like shadows stitched into the architecture of ruin. You raise your hand slowly, fingers splayed in signal, then close them into a fist. And then the world moves. You do not remember drawing your weapon, only that it is suddenly in your hand, the curved Vandal blade flashing in the torchlight as you surge forward, silent as a dream and swift as a prayer, striking low at the man nearest the wagon. He turns just as your blade slides beneath his ribs, and the surprise on his face is not fear, but confusion, as though death had not yet been permitted by his gods to arrive on such an ordinary night. He crumples without a sound. Aulus is already at the second man, his dagger plunging upward into the soft tissue beneath the jaw, a motion he performs with such brutal grace that it would be poetic if poetry had any place in war. The remaining 2 shout, spinning toward you, their spears raised, but Septimus is faster, loosing an arrow that thunks solidly into one man's throat, while the captain lunges with a short gladius, catching the final guard across the collarbone with a strike that sends him staggering, clutching his chest as blood darkens the front of his tunic. You are already at the wagon. The children recoil at your approach. One whimpers. Another tries to shield the others with his thin arms, but Publius, wide-eyed and trembling, meets your gaze and does not flinch. For a breath, you cannot move. So great is the torrent of relief and fear that floods your chest. And then you reach forward, cutting the ropes with swift, deliberate motions, murmuring his name. "Titus," he says, voice cracked but unmistakable. You nod. "I'm here." His arms go around your neck before you can react, thin and shaking, but full of desperate strength, and you lift him from the cart, pressing him to your chest with a care you haven't felt in decades. The others, emboldened by your presence, climb down as well, and Aulus immediately begins inspecting them, checking for wounds, for fever, for the dull, glassy gaze of sickness that means too late. "We can't stay," the captain says, wiping his blade clean on the tunic of the dying guard. "They'll have heard something. We need to move." You nod again, though your focus remains on Publius, on the soft rise and fall of his breath, on the warmth of him against your shoulder. He is real. He is alive. You move quickly, retracing your steps through the alleyways and side paths Caldus had etched into your memory, each turn a prayer, each corner a gamble, your ears straining for the sound of pursuit, of shouts, of horns, anything that would signal that your escape has failed. But the city is vast, and the Vandals have grown arrogant, their patrols too thin, and their discipline too recent to hold against the chaos of night. When you return to the barricade, the relief is so overwhelming that your knees nearly give way. Caldus is there to greet you, leaning on his stick, his expression unreadable, but his eyes widen slightly when he sees the children. "You found them," he says, not a question, not an accusation, just fact. You nod, placing Publius gently into Aulus's arms so you can breathe again. Caldus turns to the crowd, his voice suddenly loud, clear, carrying across the camp like the toll of an ancient bell. They brought back children, he cries. Our children. Roman children. A cheer rises not thunderous, but raw and real, the kind that shakes dust from stone and ignites fire in embers thought long dead. Mothers rush forward, fathers weep openly, even the wounded stir from their corners. Hope has returned, not in speeches or banners, but in flesh and blood, in children who were supposed to be lost and now live. You sink onto a fragment of stone, letting your breath catch up with your body, your sword still stained, your hands still trembling. Allah sits beside you, silent, then hands you a cup of tepid water. Now what he asks, you look to the east, toward the port, where ships still burn in the distance, and toward the south, where the city wall has begun to buckle under the weight of battering rams. And you realize that this, too, is not an ending, but merely a bend in the path. We gather, you say, and then we take them out. He raises an eyebrow. The Vandals. No, you say, your voice low. Steady. The children. A pause. We take them out of the city, past the ruins, through the cliff tunnels. If we can find a boat. Back to Ostia, Aulus asks, but you shake your head. Back to Rome. No, Rome has forgotten Carthage. You watch as Publius, now wrapped in blankets, begins to smile weakly at another child. We take them somewhere new, somewhere no one remembers the empire. Aulus says nothing, but he does not object. And the drums, far off, begin again. The morning that follows is not a sunrise in the traditional sense, for the sky over Carthage no longer offers the gradual golden bloom of day that once poured through temple courtyards and bathed the whitewashed homes of senators in warm promise. Instead, it begins as a muted gray stirring a dull illumination filtered through the lingering haze of smoke, ash, and soot that hangs heavy over the city like the breath of some weary, dying god. You rise slowly, your joints stiff, not just from sleep, but from the weight of the child you held pressed against your chest throughout the long night. A night in which every creak of wood, every sudden gust of wind, every far-off clang of metal upon stone made your hand instinctively reach for the hilt of your borrowed blade. Not because you expected safety, but because you dared not allow yourself to grow used to it. Publius stirs beneath your cloak, not fully awake, not fully dreaming, his small fingers curling reflexively around the folds of your tunic as though, even in slumber, he fears being torn away again by the hands of men who speak a language his ears cannot understand and wield cruelty not out of hatred, but out of a kind of disciplined indifference that is, in many ways, worse. You glance around the courtyard turned camp, where the others are already beginning to wake in slow waves. Faces drawn and gaunt, the air filled with the rustle of blankets, the soft murmurs of reassurance, and the scraping of stone against steel, as weapons are honed not for glory, but for grim necessity. Caldus is the first to approach you, limping slightly more than the day before. A new stiffness in his movements that suggests another long night without sleep. He crouches beside you with a wince and does not speak at first, choosing instead to simply look at you, at the child, at the embers of the fire now burning low in the center of the courtyard. When he does speak, his voice is quieter than usual, but also steadier, as though some unspoken truth has solidified in him overnight. You kept your word, he says simply. You brought them back. You nod, adjusting your position slightly so Publius doesn't slip from your lap. Some of them, you reply. Not all. None of us ever gets them all, Caldus says. And though it is a bitter sentiment, there is no bitterness in his voice, only weariness. The kind carved from years of loss and softened by the blunt resignation of survival. But those you saved will remember, and those of us still breathing, we remember too. You say nothing for a long moment, instead focusing on the distant shape of the port, barely visible through the fractured pillars and partially collapsed archways of the surrounding ruins. Smoke still rises from that direction, thinner now but steady, a dark reminder that the Vandals have not relented, and that whatever order might still exist in the city is not governed by any senate or general, but by chaos itself, a chaos that wears the face of young men with foreign swords and empty eyes. We have to leave, you say finally, the words more to yourself than to Caldus, but he hears them nonetheless and nods slowly. Everyone wants to leave, he replies, but most don't know how or where. You shift slightly, gently nudging Publius awake, and his eyes open with a flutter, unfocused at first, then gradually fixing on your face. There is fear there still, but also recognition of fragile, flickering trust that must be nurtured like flame. You smooth his hair back with a trembling hand, then stand, lifting him carefully before gesturing to Aulus, who approaches with the readiness of someone who has not slept but is prepared to act nonetheless. We'll need supplies, you say. Water, mostly. Some of the olive paste, whatever dried fruit you've salvaged, rope, cloth, a torch or two. And weapons, Caldus asks. You glance at the blade sheathed at your hip, only what we can carry without slowing. He nods again. How many are going? You pause, doing the calculations in your mind, the healthy, the capable, the children who can walk, the wounded who cannot. The answer, in truth, is not encouraging. 20, you say. No more. Not unless we want to leave a trail of bodies behind us. Caldus doesn't flinch, but you see the calculation in his own eyes as he silently begins sorting the names, the faces, the souls he's responsible for, deciding who can be spared, who must stay, who will be forced to watch others go while remaining behind, not because they've given up, but because their bodies have already begun the slow surrender that no willpower can reverse. By midday, the plan is in motion. You and the captain work with Septimus and Aulus to map the route one final time through the northeastern drainage tunnels beneath the old cisterns, across the ravine that borders the aqueduct ruins, and down through the shale pass that leads toward the cliffside groves where, according to Caldus's last remaining scout, a beached merchant vessel still lies half buried in salt and sand. Its hull cracked, but its structure intact enough to shelter the fleeing and perhaps, just perhaps, even float again if the tides are kind and the hands willing. The camp moves slowly, not in a column, but in small, staggered groups that slink through alleys and debris-strewn avenues, using the broken topography of the city as cover, pausing at intervals to listen for patrols, to quiet the frightened whimpers of children too young to understand the significance of silence, to steady the elderly whose bodies protest with every step. You walk at the head, Publius in your arms, now awake but still silent, his gaze moving constantly, cataloging every shadow, every motion, as if searching for traps in the very air. At one point, As you cross the shattered plaza once known as the Philosopher's Square, a place where, in better times, students would debate theology and law beneath the open sky, you are forced to halt suddenly as a group of Vandal riders passes through the far side, their laughter loud and jarring against the desolation, their horses snorting clouds of dust from broken stone. You duck behind the statue of Minerva, whose head now lies sideways in the dirt, and press Publius close, heart pounding with such force that you can feel its echo in your throat. The riders pass without seeing you, their eyes too fixed on the road ahead, perhaps already bored with the conquest of a city that offered so little resistance. The group regathers at the edge of the cistern complex, where the old maintenance tunnels descend into darkness, and you light one of the torches, its weak flame fluttering against the damp, stale air that rises from below. The descent is steep, and the floor slick with algae and filth. But the tunnel holds barely, and soon you are winding your way through narrow corridors, lined with calcified stone and iron grates rusted into strange, skeletal shapes. It takes hours. You pass through chambers filled with the bones of men who likely died waiting for rescue, rooms littered with the detritus of lives, interrupted pots still holding grain, sandals by doorways, an oil lamp carved with a dolphin motif that flickers for a moment in the torchlight, as if remembering when its flame last danced. The children grow tired, and the pace slows. But no one complains. When at last you reach the ravine, the air shifts. It is fresher here, tinged with salt and pine, and as you emerge from the last tunnel into the broken light of early evening, the sea appears on the horizon, not golden and welcoming, but vast, gray, endless. And for the first time in days, a faint breeze brushes against your skin, smelling of escape. The boat is there. It is not seaworthy by any conventional measure, its hull warped, its sail tattered, its rudder missing entirely. But it is large enough to hold the survivors, and the captain, upon inspection, believes it can be dragged to water when the tide rises. There is no cheer, no celebration, just the dull relief of one more step survived. You spend the night repairing what you can, tying ropes, patching wood with cloth and wax, gathering driftwood for a makeshift tiller. Publius helps, in his way, holding nails, fetching water, asking no questions. Aulus finds him a stick and teaches him to draw in the sand, and by moonlight, you see the boy etch the same bird you once found scratched into the plaster of a burned home. You do not cry, but your chest aches with a feeling beyond sorrow. When morning comes, the tide is high, and so you begin to push. The labor of dragging a half-buried, salt-warped vessel across the rough gravel and coarse sand of Carthage's seaward edge is not merely a physical exertion, it is a baptism of exhaustion, a ritual that strips away everything superficial until all that remains is sinew, breath, and the unrelenting drumbeat of necessity that compels the human body to continue moving forward even after it has forgotten why it began. You dig your heels into the gritty soil, your shoulders pressed against the splintered beam of the hull, each breath drawn like a blade against your ribs, the salt air stinging your throat with every inhalation as if the very sea itself were demanding payment for passage. Around you, the others grunt and groan in a ragged harmony, each man and woman driven not by hope long having been replaced by something harder, more durable, but by the realization that remaining still would be a slower, crueler death than any that might await on the water. The sun, though obscured by a pale curtain of morning mist, lends a humid weight to the air. the kind that coats the skin with a sheen of sweat before the first full hour of day has passed. The sea glimmers beyond the dunes, a vast and undulating promise whose beauty, in any other moment, might stir awe, but now only inspires urgency. You can see the tide receding already, a cruel reminder that time is a beast with no allegiance, dragging the ocean back from your reach even as you lurch forward to meet it. The sand beneath your feet shifts with each step, pulling at your boots, resisting the motion like a jealous rival, unwilling to release its grip on the vessel you and your weary companions have worked so desperately to salvage from the graveyard of a fallen empire. Publius, though too small to help in any significant way, runs ahead and back in frantic loops, fetching rope, untangling stray knots, offering cups of water to those whose knees have buckled beneath them. There is no fear in his eyes now, only the desperate energy of a child who has been given something to protect. You watch him out of the corner of your eye as you heave the final length of the hull free from the last tangle of coastal brush, and you marvel, as all aging men do, at the resilience of the young and the way it can manifest not just in play, but in duty, in loyalty, in the silent acknowledgement of shared trauma that turns strangers into comrades in the space of a single night. The captain, his face streaked with sweat and blood from a reopened wound on his scalp, takes the lead in securing the stern with what remains of the mooring line. His voice, roughened from shouting commands through broken teeth and sleepless hours, is steady nonetheless as he calls for one last push. You throw your shoulder into the task, the muscles in your back screaming with each motion, your hands blistered from rope and rust, your legs trembling beneath the burden. Beside you, Aulus is gritting his teeth so hard that a thin line of blood traces from the corner of his mouth, and Septimus, ever silent, pulls with the grim concentration of a man who has made peace with the idea that this, perhaps, will be his final act. When at last the prow touches water, there is no cheer, no eruption of joy or relief. Instead, a collective exhale passes through the group, a sigh so deep and weary it seems to deflate the very bones of every person present. The boat rocks, unbalanced, sluggish, but afloat. You stagger back, wiping your brow with a sleeve, stiff with sweat and dirt, and stare at the sea as if unsure whether it has truly accepted your offering, or is merely toying with you before swallowing it whole. Caldus approaches then, slower than the others, leaning heavily on the broken haft of a spear that has become his walking staff. His face is drawn tight with pain, but his eyes, clouded though they are with age, remain sharp, measuring, alive. "It'll hold," he says, though the tremble in his voice betrays doubt. "Not far, not long, but maybe enough. Enough is all we need," you reply, though the words feel hollow. You scan the horizon, gauging the current, estimating the path along the coast that might bring you to the safer coves beyond the reach of the Vandal fleet, assuming they have not already mapped every inlet, every beach, every hiding place this old coast has to offer. One by one, the refugees begin boarding. The children are lifted first, their thin arms clinging to the necks of those who carry them, their eyes darting across the water as if expecting it to suddenly surge up and deny them this small miracle. Next come the wounded, carried on makeshift stretchers or cradled like infants, their faces waxen with fever or bruised into blankness. Last are the able-bodied, the fighters, the runners, those who might still wield a blade or pull an oar should the wind fail and the enemy appear without warning. You take your place near the tiller, such as it is a piece of driftwood bound with iron to the remnants of the original helm. Aulus takes the forward post, a rusted harpoon at his side. Septimus readies his bow, though his quiver is down to the final 2 arrows. The captain, pale but composed, positions himself at the rear, eyes on the coastline, watching for movement. The boat slides into deeper water, and for the first time, you feel the pull of the open sea beneath you, a lurch, a shift, a subtle but undeniable moment when the vessel becomes no longer a burden, but a vehicle, not a tomb, but a chance. The sail, patched and mismatched, catches a breeze, a weak one, but enough to sway the canvas and turn the prow toward the south. And so you begin. The coastline unfurls slowly, the high cliffs and ruined villas of Carthage fading into a smoky silhouette, each wave carrying you farther from the city that once claimed your loyalty, your youth, your family. You do not look back often, but when you do, it is not with grief or regret, but with the quiet solemnity of a man who has survived the burial of more than just a city. Hours pass. The wind holds steady. The sea is kind. And then, as the sun begins to lower into the horizon, casting the sky into streaks of pink and orange and deep, bruised violet, a shape appears ahead, a dark blot against the soft line of the waves. Another ship? You raise a hand to shield your eyes, squinting into the sun, and feel a cold coil wrap itself around your spine. The vessel is large, 2-masted, square-rigged, and bearing no flags. Its hull is blackened, not with paint, but with the charring of fire, perhaps from battle, perhaps from worse. It is drifting slowly, its sails slack, its deck empty of movement. You signal to the others to brace. The captain turns pale, reaching for his weapon. The children huddle closer together, their murmurs rising in fearful harmony. But you hold your hand up, not yet. As your vessel draws nearer, the other ship becomes clearer, its hull split at the bow, its figurehead shattered, its lines tangled in seaweed and barnacles. It is not a Vandal ship, nor is it Roman. It is something older, a trader's vessel perhaps, caught in the first wave of the invasion and forgotten here on the tide. You nod to Aulus. Board it. He hesitates only for a breath, then leaps onto the deck, followed by Septimus. The 2 move quickly, scanning for threats, weapons raised. But there are none. And then Aulus calls out. Food, he says, and water. It is enough. The 2 ships are lashed together with rope, and one by one, the refugees climb aboard the larger vessel, settling in its shadowed hold, thankful not for riches or glory, but for shelter, for sustenance, for something that feels like the beginning of survival, rather than its postponement. You remain at the tiller, watching the horizon, your hand resting on Publius's shoulder as he stands beside you, silent, staring into the gathering dusk. He tugs on your tunic once, then speaks quietly, firmly. Will we be safe now? You do not answer immediately. Instead, you place a hand on his back, guiding him gently toward the hold. We'll keep moving, you say. That's how we stay safe. And in the fading light, you whisper not a prayer, but a promise. To keep the ship afloat, to keep the children alive, to keep the sea behind you, not beneath. The first full night at sea away from the smoldering ruins of Carthage, beyond the cries of its dying alleys, beyond the reach of torchlight, and the echo of boots clanging against temple stones settles over the makeshift vessel, like a solemn benediction, a slow descent of silence and darkness that feels less like escape and more like suspension, as though the world itself has paused to take a breath and assess whether this small band of exhausted fugitives will be permitted to slip past the edges of death's reach, or whether the sea, so often indifferent and cruel, will simply choose to close its hand around them at the final moment and pull them beneath its restless skin. You lie with your back against the warped curve of the hull, one hand resting lightly on the hilt of your blade, not in anticipation of an attack, but more as a reflex muscle memory burned into your bones from decades of sleep, interrupted by the sound of steel scraping from sheaths, and as the moon climbs slowly into the sky, a pale coin flickering behind veils of thin mist. You feel the ship groan beneath you like an old animal, uncertain of its next breath, every joint and seam straining against time, tide, and memory. The children, those small, miraculous bundles of defiance and fragility, have collapsed into sleep all around the deck, draped over coils of rope, curled against the railings, nestled into each other's arms, as if instinctively forming a wall of warmth against the chill that rises from the sea. Publius is beside you, wrapped in a threadbare woolen cloak scavenged from the hold of the burned merchant ship, his breath shallow but even, his face slack with exhaustion, but no longer twisted in fear. You can feel the rise and fall of his chest, where it presses lightly against your hip. And though you try not to dwell too long on the image, your mind conjures, unbidden, the memory of him as a newborn barely the length of your forearm, shrieking at the indignity of light for the first time. Eyes clenched shut, as if unwilling to believe the world could be anything other than the muffled, dark warmth from which he had been expelled. He has survived things now that you had once hoped he would never even hear about. And yet here he is, still breathing, still clinging to life with the quiet ferocity of a child who refuses to be left behind. The others lie scattered across the deck and hold Aulus, whose blade has not left his belt since the moment you boarded. Now sleeps propped against the mast, head tilted back, mouth open, dreaming perhaps of nothing, which would be a mercy. Septimus, the archer with no arrows left, has wedged himself between two barrels near the stern, his face turned to the stars, lips moving in some silent counting ritual or private prayer. The captain, whose name you realize you still do not know, sits with his legs dangling over the side of the ship, shoulders hunched, eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting enemy sails to rise at any moment from the dark, like ghosts summoned by unfinished business. No one speaks. No one dreams aloud. The ship glides, creaks, breathes. And the sea, that vast and ancient thing which once carried the legions of Rome to the edges of the known world, offers no comfort. You rise just before dawn, muscles stiff, neck aching, knees resisting the motion with a sullen creak. The sky is still dark, but it has begun to bleed along the eastern rim, a faint light like the first intake of breath before a scream, and you move carefully to avoid waking those who have earned a few more moments of rest. The tiller has shifted slightly in the night, the ropes pulled taut by an irregular current or perhaps the subtle influence of wind, and you move to correct it, adjusting the sail just enough to correct the angle, watching the stars overhead to keep your heading. You do not truly know where you are going, not with any precision, only that south means away from Carthage, and that somewhere along this jagged stretch of African coast lies the possibility of safety, or at least the temporary illusion of it, which will suffice until the children can walk farther, and the sea offers a different verdict. As the sun begins to rise slowly, reluctantly, as though even it is unsure whether to cast light on what remains of the world, you feel a strange weight lift from your shoulders. Not because anything has changed, but because the act of surviving one more night has become its own kind of triumph. The color returns to the world in layers first, the deep, bruised purples of the horizon, then the sickly green tinge of the shallows, then the golden wash that spills across the deck and makes even the ship's broken boards seem momentarily whole. Publius stirs beside you, blinking against the light, and you offer him a cup of water drawn from the barrel you covered last night to keep out ash and salt spray. He drinks without complaint, then curls back up beside you, head against your side, sighing like a man 4 times his age. Around mid-morning, you see the first signs of land, not the sweeping hills or olive groves you might have hoped for, but a jagged ridge of rocks jutting from the water like broken teeth, their black edges streaked with barnacles and bird droppings, their angles too sharp for anchorage but close enough to signal proximity to shore. Aulus climbs to the masthead to scout, and when he returns, he reports what he saw: a cove, shallow and sheltered, just beyond the reef, with a ruined watchtower slumped against the cliff like a drunkard asleep at a banquet. "We can land there," he says, and though the statement is simple, it feels like prophecy. The captain agrees, directing you all into position, and together you begin the slow, delicate maneuver of bringing the battered ship around the rocks and into the cove. The water is shallower here, clearer, and you can see the seaweed waving lazily beneath the hull, the pale shapes of fish darting between the shadows. The children watch in fascination, their fear momentarily forgotten, and one even laughs a bright, unguarded sound that rings across the deck like a challenge to despair. You reach the shore just before noon, grounding the ship on a strip of sand studded with driftwood and mussel shells. The sun beats down, heavy now, and the wind shifts again, bringing with it the scent of pine and warm stone. It is the smell of land, not cities or farms or homes, but of wilderness, of possibility. You unload what supplies remain: water, some cloth, the tools scavenged from the hold, and begin erecting a temporary shelter against the side of the ruined tower, which, though partially collapsed, offers enough cover from the wind to house the children and the weakest among you. Aulus and Septimus take the first patrol inland, scouting for signs of danger, while you and the captain see to the wounded. One girl, no older than 5, has a fever that refuses to break. And though you soak cloth in cool water and place it against her brow, you can see in her eyes that she is drifting toward a place from which you cannot retrieve her. Still, you stay beside her, telling stories in a voice gone hoarse from salt and wind, stories about ships with silver sails and birds that sing only at night, hoping that she will carry something kind with her if she must go. Night falls again, and you sit beneath the stars with Publius curled against you, his fingers tangled in your cloak. The others sleep around you, their breathing the only sound besides the waves lapping against the sand. You look to the sky and wonder if Rome still exists as you once knew it. You look to the sea and wonder what it has taken that you'll never see again. And then, slowly, you close your eyes, and for the first time in what feels like 100 years, you sleep without the hilt of your sword in your hand. Dawn breaks with an odd, almost diffident stillness, as though the day itself is unsure whether it ought to arrive at all after the passage of so much grief, so much exhaustion, and so many prayers offered not with words or incense, but with raw hands, blistered feet, and the determined silence of those who have seen too much to believe in miracles, yet continue onward in spite of it. The light spills slowly over the jagged ridge above the cove, filtered first through the remnants of an overgrown pine canopy, then through the crumbled gaps of the ruined watchtower, and finally across the sand where the makeshift camp lies, huddled shapes draped in blankets and cloaks, some breathing evenly, some twitching as nightmares pull at the frayed edges of their sleep, and a few, like yourself, sitting upright long before the sun rises, too accustomed to unrest to ever again allow themselves the indulgence of full repose. You had not intended to fall asleep, and in truth, what little rest you allowed yourself was not sleep in the proper sense, but a kind of waking trance, the state that old soldiers often drift into after days of retreat, where the body continues its rhythms, breathing and blinking and keeping still, while the mind walks through corridors of memory and maps the terrain of future fears, not to solve them, but simply to prepare for the impact. You rose before the others, as you have done for most of your life, and made your way to the edge of the water where the sea laps gently at the rocks, its mood strangely serene after so many days of violence, as if nature itself were indifferent to the chaos of empires and the petty machinations of men, focused instead on its eternal cycle of pull and release, of swell and retreat, its heartbeat measured in tides rather than tears. The boat still lies grounded, half submerged in the shallows, its hull groaning softly with each motion of the water, a relic now useless for any future voyage but sacred nonetheless, for it carried you here, for it bore witness to a deliverance not earned, but clawed from the clenched jaws of despair. You walk its length slowly, pressing your palm to the worn timbers, whispering a wordless farewell, not because the ship can hear, but because you need to speak something into the world before the long silence of the road resumes. When you return to the tower, the camp is beginning to stir. Alice is already up, checking the perimeter with the habitual precision of a man who has never stopped expecting an ambush. He does not speak when he sees you, but simply nods. And you return the gesture, that silent exchange between men who understand that companionship does not require conversation, only mutual vigilance. Septimus is tending to the girl with the fever, the one who, last night, seemed to teeter so close to the edge of death that you had already begun crafting the words you might say when her breath finally stopped. But she is still breathing, barely. And in that fragile rhythm, there lies a stubborn defiance that forces you to reconsider the limits of endurance. The captain, ever the pragmatic sentinel, stands at the edge of the bluff, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon, his jaw clenched as if trying to will the sea to divulge its secrets. When you approach him, he does not turn, but you can see the tension in his shoulders, the flicker in his eyes that betrays the weight of the choice ahead. "They'll come looking," he says finally, his voice hoarse but controlled. "Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. They'll search every cove, every inlet. They'll find this place." You nod, I know. "We're not ready to fight. We're barely alive." Again, you nod. I know that too. He finally turns to face you, the wind catching his cloak and lifting it behind him like a broken sail. So what now? It is a fair question, one that you have been circling in your mind since the moment you realized the boat would not carry you any farther. And now, with the sun rising and the first full day on land ahead of you, you answer not with certainty, but with resolve. We walk. Where? You gesture south, where the coastline rises into a series of rolling hills dotted with olive trees and distant gullies, terrain that might conceal movement, offer shelter, lead to another port, another chance, until we find a town, a village, anything with a roof and a well, maybe even another boat. But we can't stay here. The captain studies the land for a moment longer, then exhales slowly and gives a single nod, the kind of assent that carries not enthusiasm, but agreement born of logic and weariness. Within an hour, the camp is packed. Blankets are folded into bundles, provisions divided among those strong enough to carry them, and the children are organized into pairs, each with an adult to guide them. Publius stays close to your side, his small hand gripping the hem of your tunic with such force that you wonder if he will ever let go. But you do not discourage him. If this journey must be made, then let it be made with what few bonds remain unbroken. The group sets out in a long, meandering line, more a procession than a march, their pace slow but steady, their footsteps muffled against the uneven earth. The landscape changes quickly, first the soft crunch of sand, then the crackle of dry underbrush, then the firmer resistance of soil packed beneath old roots. The scent of the sea fades gradually, replaced by the mingled aromas of pine resin, sun-warmed stone, and the faint sweetness of blooming wildflowers that seem almost surreal in contrast to the recent stench of death and fire. You walk for hours, stopping only when the youngest among you begin to stumble, and even then, only long enough to drink water, share what food remains, and press forward. You pass an abandoned shepherd's hut, its roof half collapsed, its walls overgrown with ivy and lichen, and though it offers little in the way of shelter, you mark it in your mind. It is the first sign that civilization has not entirely receded into myth. Toward evening, the land flattens into a narrow plateau, and from its edge, you finally see it, a small village nestled in a hollow between two ridges, its stone walls intact, its rooftops still catching the last rays of sunlight, a thin wisp of smoke rising from a chimney near the center. It is not much, perhaps a dozen structures, a single well, a field of tilled soil waiting for the next season, but it is life. You approach cautiously, sending Aulus and Septimus ahead to scout, and when they return, it is with guarded optimism. There are people, Aulus says, farmers, mostly, a few elders, no signs of soldiers, no Vandals, none we could see. You lead the group down the slope, heart pounding not from fear, but from something closer to disbelief. When you reach the village gates, if the low stone arch can be called that, a man emerges to meet you, his expression wary, but not hostile. You raise your hands in greeting, stepping forward with Publius at your side. We're not here to take, you say. We're only here to live. The man studies you, then the others, then the boy. And after a long silence, he nods. That night, for the first time in weeks, you sleep beneath a roof. For the first time in weeks, you hear laughter. For the first time in weeks, you feel, however faintly, that you are home, as the final light of day yields to the hush of dusk, and the weary steps of your journey give way to the comfort of stillness. You find yourself surrounded, not by the sounds of war or waves or mourning, but by the soft cadence of a world slowly healing. The crackle of firewood whispers from a nearby hearth. Somewhere beyond the thatched rooftops, an owl begins its quiet call into the night, and overhead, the sky, vast and unbroken, scatters its stars like forgotten coins across the black velvet of heaven. Your body rests, though it still remembers every bruise, every heartbeat of terror, every grain of sand pressed into aching souls. But now, at last, there is no call to rise, no sail to hoist, no oar to pull against the tide. The journey has narrowed to this an open door, a warm bowl of lentils, a wool blanket pulled gently up to your chin by hands that mean no harm. You close your eyes not from fatigue, but from peace. The sea is behind you. The fight, for now, is over. What lies ahead is uncertain. Yes, but it is your own. And whether it holds vineyards or grandchildren, carpentry or silence, you know that you have earned every breath of it. You, who once swore never to sail again, answered the call one last time, not for empire, not for vengeance, but for love. And that made all the difference. So rest now, old sailor. Let your sword rust. Let your memories soften. Let the waves carry your dreams tonight, not as burdens, but as lullabies. Sleep well. The story is done.